election of 2000 was between Al Gore and George W. Bush. It took 5 weeks to declare a winner because the vote was so close in Florida. My parents, Joe and Andrea, were Christmas shopping one Saturday during the long 5-week wait when they were stopped by reporters in the mall who asked them what they thought about the ongoing election battle. While both my parents answered in favor of the then President-elect President Bush, the reporters misquoted my dad. They made it seem as though he wanted Al Gore to be the winner, but that was not the case. They twisted his words so soundly from what they originally were that it resulted in my father writing the newspaper to ask them to retract the story, while also writing to the editorial page to expose the biased and untruthful reporting. Our First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, but with freedom comes responsibility. The American news media has become so caught up in personal bias and political agendas that they have forgotten about the very reason they were created: to report truth and fact to the American people. Regardless of our political affiliations, we are Americans, and Americans have always sought to hear truth and fact from their leaders. Today, we'll be looking at 3 examples of when the American news media has reported on their own political agendas and personal biases instead of actual fact. Throughout history, we have seen the trend that the leaders that have been successful in their empires are the ones that got the people to repeat and believe their agendas. This is exactly what the American news media is trying to do and was clearly represented during the news coverage of the Mueller investigation. According to the Washington Examiner, the Mueller investigation started with James Comey going before the Foreign Intelligence and Surveillance Court, or FISA, with a fake dossier written by Christopher Steele and funded by the Democratic Party, asking for a warrant to investigate President Trump for colluding with Russia to win the 2016 election. When they were unable to find anything with this warrant, USA Today states that he was able to have the warrant expanded to include a vague obstruction of justice warrant, as well as just Russian collusion. With this warrant, he was able to dive into Trump's finances and personal business, looking for anything to impeach him with. Throughout the course of the Mueller investigation, the news media always framed their account of what was happening towards where they wanted it to go. For instance, Fox News framed it as a ridiculous investigation that needed to end, while CNN, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, all Democratic news outlets, framed it as if there was something important that needed to be discovered at any cost. Both sides were finding sources to promote their narratives. Alan Dershowitz, an American attorney who offered credible predictions throughout the course of the Mueller investigation, said that he was banned from CNN. When he asked why that was, he said he received the response it was because he was offering a narrative that was in favor of the president. CNN instead brought on Michael Avenatti, an American attorney who also offered predictions on the Mueller investigation, but they were against President Trump. Mr. Dershowitz, meanwhile, went on most of the other news networks at some point presenting a narrative that was in favor of the president. The Mueller report, released in March of 2019, found President Trump and his campaign to be innocent of any collusion with Russia to win the 2016 election. Though the nearly 3-year investigation did find 8 men who were breaking the law in other areas, it did not find what it went in there to prove: that President Trump had done anything worthy of being impeached. Now, why would the American news media not only present such different versions of the Mueller investigation, but find different sources to promote their narrative, regardless of what the facts were? The answer would be logically that they only reported on what fit their narrative, and both sides of the political spectrum were guilty of this. The right-wing media wanted to prove that there wasn't anything worthy of an investigation there, so they brought on people who agreed with this narrative. While the left-wing media wanted to prove that President Trump had cheated to win the election and impeach him, and also cherry-picked who they brought on to speak. Furthermore, the American news media promotes their own political agendas and personal biases instead of actual facts by misrepresenting the facts in stories. This is not to say that every story you hear or read in the news media is completely false fact-wise, but sometimes, if it fits their narrative, they will fudge the facts to prove their point. And a great example of this is the Covington Catholic schoolboys and the Indian Elder. According to USA Today, a group of teens was waiting for their bus by the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. after participating in the annual anti-abortion March for Life, when the Indigenous Peoples March began, and a group of Black Hebrew Israelites started to verbally attack the protesters and the boys. The video shows the boys trying to respectfully show that they weren't intimidated by the Black Hebrew Israelites, starting to do school chants with the permission of their chaperones. Tensions were high, and the men that were drumming started to make their way towards a group of boys. As the crowd parted, you could see a young man in a Make America Great Again hat smiling by the teens' account, or smirking by the media's account at the Native American elder who was drumming near his face. And as it is the 21st century, the whole incident was caught on camera, and the video went viral. Pretty quickly, the news media got wind of it, and when they broke the story over the weekend, they took it out of context and without fact-checking the situation. They framed Nick Sandmann as this disrespectful teen who bullied the peaceful Native American elder, when that was not the case, as was discovered upon further research. News outlets reported on it with headlines like this New York Times headline: "Viral video shows boys in Make America Great Again hats surrounding Native elder." The teen in the video, Nick Sandmann, has said he received multiple death threats over the way the video was portrayed. As journalists dug deeper, they found more video footage that shed some light on the situation. Some news outlets tried to stick the new findings onto the current story, but that didn't work out as planned. Because with more video footage being released, the nation was able to go online and discover for themselves what was going on. Both the teen in the video, Nick Sandmann, and the Native American elder, Nathan Phillips, had given their accounts of what happened. And with their accounts and the video footage, we have a better picture of what actually happened that day. Now let's step back for a moment. Why would the news media be so eager to jump on the bandwagon of attacking this young man without fact-checking the story first? Because it proved their narrative that Trump supporters are haters and racists. It was too good to be true. They finally had video proof of the narrative they had been trying to prove for months. But when they didn't fact-check the story, they ended up letting Sandmann receive death threats over something that turned out to not even be true. And lastly, but certainly not least, the American news media promotes their own political agendas and personal biases instead of actual fact by cherry-picking the stories they report on. The American news media is very careful about the stories that they decide to air. For instance, were you aware that during this past summer there was major fighting between Russia and Ukraine? This was news to me. Russia and Ukraine have been fighting since 2014, but there was a ceasefire in 2015, which went largely ignored by both countries. The war, referred to as the Donbas War, Donbas being the region the war is being fought in, and Europe's forgotten war, has killed around 13,000 people. The Union Information Agency, which is a Ukrainian news source, had an article in January of 2019, and it said from April 2014 to the end of 2018, some 12,800 to 13,000 people have been killed in Donbas hostilities, according to the UN Monitoring Mission on Human Rights. Around 3,300 of those victims were civilians, while 4,000 were Ukrainian military and 5,500 Russia-backed armed militants. This should be headline news, but it isn't. Ever since President Trump has been elected, we have been living in what I like to refer to as a Trump bubble. Everything the media reports on revolves around what President Trump has said or done, what certain politicians have to say on him, and either attacking or defending his legitimacy as the president. The media is on a mission to delegitimize an election that did not end in their favor. Therefore, we haven't heard anything else since then. Meanwhile, they're leaving a void where news of what is happening outside the Trump bubble should be. Let's head back to the story I began my speech with. My father had written a newspaper and he asked them to retract the story, and he also asked they print the accurate statement. They printed his letter in the newspaper soon after receiving it. When we hold the media accountable, they do correct their bias and print the accurate statement. My challenge to you today is to be proactive in researching the facts behind the stories you read. See what two different news anchors with different political affiliations have to say on a topic, and then form your opinion. Educating ourselves on important issues is paramount to the improvement of our country. I like to leave you with this quote by Thomas Jefferson, who said, "Educate and inform the whole mass of the people. They are the only sure alliance for the preservation of our liberty." If we want change to occur, then we have to act, and that begins with educating